I arrived at the family dinner driving a $100,000 luxury car, the first thing I ever bought just for myself. My mom looked at it, let out a small laugh, and said, "Maybe it's time for you to stop living so comfortably." I just answered quietly, "All right." That night, I logged into my accounts and canceled 118 automatic payments: the mortgage, car installments, school tuition, gym memberships, clubs, groceries, even their pet insurance. By the time the sun came up, the comfort everyone called a normal life had completely disappeared. When I parked the car in front of my parents' house that evening, I could already feel my stomach tightening. The neighborhood was exactly as I remembered it: perfect lawns, polished mailboxes, people who waved out of obligation more than kindness. I used to find comfort in that sameness. Lately, it just made me feel like a stranger driving through a museum of lives that never changed. The car was the first thing I ever bought just for me. No compromises, no negotiations, no secondhand anything. I worked for it, saved for it, and when the dealership handed me the keys, I remember thinking, this is what freedom feels like. I didn't expect my mom's first reaction to be laughter. She looked at the car like it was a punchline to a joke she'd been waiting to tell. Then she said it, so casually it almost didn't register at first. "Maybe it's time for you to stop living so comfortably." Everyone else at the table laughed along. My dad said something about how I'd always been spoiled. My brother chimed in, teasing that maybe I should start paying their bills too, since I was basically rich now. It was supposed to be a joke, but I could feel the weight behind it. I didn't say much after that. I just nodded, smiled when I needed to, and let their words sit in my chest until they started burning. By the time dessert came out, I already knew I wasn't coming back for a long time. That night, when I got home, I didn't cry. I just sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt cold and steady, the opposite of the dinner table's noise. My fingers moved almost automatically. Bank app, accounts, payments. One by one, I started canceling everything. The mortgage, canceled. The car installments, canceled. The tuition payments for my niece's private school, canceled. My mom's gym membership, my dad's golf club fees, the grocery deliveries I'd been covering for months, even the pet insurance for their dog Daisy. There were 118 automatic payments in total. It shocked me how much I'd been carrying without realizing it. Every transaction was like a string tying me to them, and I'd spent years pretending it didn't matter because that's what family does. But it did matter. It mattered a lot. When the last cancellation confirmation appeared, I closed the laptop and sat there in silence. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. Relief, maybe. Or exhaustion from years of being everyone's safety net while pretending I didn't need one myself. By morning, I had erased every trace of the financial comfort they took for granted. When the sun came up, I walked to the window and looked at the car parked outside. For the first time, I saw it not as a luxury, but as a symbol of everything I'd been accused of. Comfort, selfishness, distance. I thought about selling it. Then I didn't. I wasn't going to let their resentment rewrite the meaning of something I'd worked for. I checked my phone. No messages yet, but I knew they'd come soon. By noon, the calls started. First from my mom, then my brother, then my dad. I didn't answer any of them. I just watched the screen light up over and over until it finally went silent. Then came the texts. Short, panicked, confused. Mortgage payment bounced. Is there something wrong with your account? Did you change cards? Call me, now. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Every message felt like a tug at the same invisible chain I'd spent the night cutting. Around 3 p.m. My mom finally sent one that made me stop scrolling. "I don't know what's going on, but if this is about last night, you're being childish." Childish. That word hit harder than I expected. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to prove I wasn't. The promotions, the long hours, the weekends spent fixing their problems instead of living my own. None of that had ever been enough. The truth was, they only saw me as responsible when it benefited them. The moment I made a decision they didn't approve of, I was a selfish kid again. I turned my phone face down and sat on the couch. The house felt too quiet. I realized I'd built this entire space to be something they'd approve of. Neutral tones, expensive furniture, nothing too bold. Suddenly, it all felt staged, like I'd been living in someone else's idea of success. I ordered takeout and ate it straight from the container. No table setting, no pretense. It felt strangely liberating. Around sunset, there was a knock on the door. I didn't even need to look through the peephole. It was my mother. She didn't waste time with small talk. She asked if my bank had been hacked. I told her no. Then she asked why all the payments were canceled. I said it was because I was done. She looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Done with what? I told her I was tired of being the only adult in the family, tired of fixing things that shouldn't be mine to fix, tired of being thanked only when they needed something. She didn't argue. She just stared, her mouth tight, her eyes flicking around the room like she was searching for proof that I'd lost my mind. Then she said, almost softly, "We never asked you to do all that." That was the part that broke me. Because it was true, in a way. They never asked. They just expected. And I kept giving, thinking that if I gave enough, maybe I'd finally feel like part of something. After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore, just hollow. I checked my email before bed. 47 unread messages. Most of them automatic notifications about failed payments and account changes. The rest were from my family. My brother wrote that I'd ruined everything. My dad's message was just one line. "We thought you were better than this." I closed my laptop and tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling the same question. What if they were right? What if I wasn't better than this? Then another thought crept in. What if I finally was? The next morning, I woke up to silence again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that fills every corner of a room and reminds you that something has changed for good. I made coffee and opened my banking app, almost out of habit. The balance looked strange, higher than I'd seen in months. For years, it had been a blur of withdrawals and transfers, endless lines of expenses that weren't even mine. Seeing it still felt wrong, like looking at money that didn't belong to me even though it did. I closed it and tried to focus on work, but concentration wasn't possible. My email pinged every few minutes. Mortgage companies, utility providers, schools, they were all asking for updated payment information. I could almost hear the chaos spreading through my family's week. Around 10 a.m., my brother showed up. He didn't even knock properly, just banged on the door until I opened. He looked furious, the kind of anger that hides fear. He demanded to know what was wrong with me. I told him nothing was wrong. I was just done paying for everyone else's lives. He said I was being dramatic, that no one forced me to do it. I told him that was the problem. They didn't have to force me because I'd been trained to say yes before anyone even asked. He didn't like that. He told me our parents had given me everything, that I owed them for it. I asked him when everything stopped being emotional support and started being invoices. He had no answer. He just shook his head and said Mom was crying, Dad was furious, and that I'd better fix this before things got worse. When he left, I sat by the window, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't used to being seen as the villain, but maybe that was necessary. Maybe it was the only way for them to finally see me as a person instead of a bank account. By the afternoon, the group chat lit up again. Mom said she didn't recognize me anymore. Dad said this selfish phase would pass. My brother sent a string of question marks followed by, "You'll regret this." I muted the chat. Later that night, I took a long drive with no destination. The city lights blurred by, and for the first time in years, I wasn't calculating, budgeting, or planning. I just drove. When I stopped at a red light, I realized something. Every major decision in my life had been shaped by guilt. The career I chose, the city I lived in, even the people I dated, all of it built around keeping other people comfortable. The idea of living for myself felt almost wrong, but I couldn't unsee it now. When I got home, there were voicemails waiting. My dad said they might have to sell the house if I didn't come to my senses. My mom said they couldn't believe I'd actually turn on my own family. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed and started writing down every recurring expense I used to cover. Not to reinstate them, just to see it clearly. The numbers formed a pattern: mortgage, tuition, utilities, insurance, groceries. My handwriting got shaky halfway through. Each line was a reminder of how far I'd gone trying to prove I was good enough for people who never saw me that way. By the time I finished, I realized it wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about control. Theirs over me, mine over my guilt. And maybe for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the power. 2 days passed before my mom stopped calling. The silence that followed felt strange, almost like withdrawal. I kept expecting the phone to light up, for someone to need something, for me to step in and fix it, but no one did. Not anymore. The first night without any messages, I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought I'd feel free, but mostly I just felt empty. I'd built my entire identity around being useful, reliable, generous. Without that, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. On the third day, I ran into my mom at the grocery store. I saw her before she saw me, standing in the frozen foods aisle, comparing prices on brands she used to buy without looking twice. Her hair was messy, her face tense. It hit me that she wasn't used to worrying about money anymore. I'd made sure of that. When she noticed me, she didn't smile. She just said, "I hope you're happy." I told her I wasn't, not yet. But I needed to be. She sighed, put the cheaper brand into her cart, and said, "You've always had to prove something, haven't you?" Then she walked away. I stood there for a long time after that. It was strange. She wasn't wrong. My whole life, I'd been proving I could handle things. I thought if I became indispensable, I'd finally earn respect. But what I earned was dependency. And now that I'd cut it off, everyone was angry, even me. That night, I went through old emails, tax receipts, transfer confirmations, every transaction I'd made on their behalf, line after line of evidence that I'd given up pieces of myself to maintain peace. Then I found one message from my dad, dated 4 years ago. It was short. "Thanks, kid. Don't tell your mom I needed help again." Something about that message broke me. It wasn't gratitude, it was secrecy. I had become their quiet solution, their invisible fix, and they'd all gotten comfortable pretending it didn't happen. I realized I'd been angry at the wrong thing. It wasn't just about money. It was about being invisible while carrying everyone's weight. The next morning, I decided to do something small but symbolic. I drove that same luxury car, the one that started all of this, to my parents' house. It sat gleaming in the driveway as I rang the doorbell. My mom opened the door, surprised but calm. I told her I was selling the car. She asked why. I said it wasn't because of guilt. It was because I wanted to start over, truly start over, with nothing tying me to that night. She didn't argue. She just nodded, almost relieved, and said she hoped I was making smarter choices now. I didn't respond. I just handed her a check, my final gesture. It covered 1 month of their bills, no more. I told her it was to give them time to adjust. When I turned to leave, she said, "We raised you better than this." I stopped at the door and said quietly, "No, you raised me to think love means debt." Then I walked out. Driving away, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, like something that had been weighing on me for years had finally started to dissolve. But underneath that lightness, there was something else, fear. Because if I wasn't their provider anymore, who was I supposed to be? The first week after cutting them off felt like learning to breathe differently. Every morning, I woke up expecting a message, a demand, some new crisis to handle, but my phone stayed quiet. The silence that once terrified me slowly began to feel like peace. Still, I didn't know what to do with all the space it left behind. I had built my life around responsibility. Without that constant weight, everything felt both calm and meaningless. I started walking in the evenings. Nothing fancy, just long walks around the neighborhood, watching people water their lawns or carry groceries inside. They all looked normal, ordinary, and I realized that was what I wanted. An ordinary life, not one built on obligation or guilt. On the 7th night, I came home to an envelope taped to my front door. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The handwriting was my father's. Inside was a short note and a folded piece of paper. The note said, "Your mother is angry, but she doesn't understand. I do. I just wish you'd told us sooner. Take care of yourself. Dad." The folded paper was a photo of me and him from years ago, when I'd bought them their first car after college. We were both smiling, proud. Back then, I really believed I was doing something good. I sat at the kitchen table with the photo for a long time. My dad had always been quieter than my mom, more practical. Maybe he really did understand. Or maybe he just didn't want to fight anymore. The next morning, my brother called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice sounded different, tired, less angry. He said they were figuring things out. He'd picked up a second job. My parents were talking about downsizing. Then he asked, "Was it really that bad for you?" I told him yes, that I hadn't realized how deep I was drowning until I stopped swimming. He didn't say much after that. Just told me Mom missed me but didn't know how to say it. When the call ended, I sat there feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time, I wasn't the only one trying. Over the next few weeks, things changed in small ways. My mom stopped sending passive-aggressive texts. My dad sent photos of the house renovations they were doing themselves. My brother texted occasionally to ask how I was, not what I could do for him. I started therapy, something I'd been putting off for years because I always told myself I didn't have time. The therapist asked me what I wanted out of life if I took everyone else out of the equation. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but it felt like the right question. One evening, I sat in the driveway looking at the car, still unsold. The reflection in the window showed someone I barely recognized. Tired, yes, but calmer. That car used to be proof that I'd made it. Now it was just a reminder that I could start over if I wanted to. I took out my phone and listed it for sale. It sold 2 days later to a young couple who couldn't stop smiling. When they drove away, I watched the taillights disappear down the street and felt something close to closure. That night, I walked around the house, turning off lights one by one. For the first time, it didn't feel like an empty space. It felt like mine. I wasn't sure where life would go next, but I finally knew it would be mine to decide. A month later, I barely recognized my own routine. My days had gotten quieter but fuller in strange ways. I was learning how to take care of myself without turning it into a project. I cooked for one, paid only my own bills, walked into stores without mentally calculating who else might need something. It was small, but it was freedom. One Saturday morning, I went to the local farmer's market. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. There was a band playing, kids running around, and people selling homemade candles and pies. It felt simple and real. I didn't know anyone, and no one knew me. That was the best part. While I was picking apples, my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. I froze for a second before opening it. "Can we talk?" "No lectures. I just want to see you." I stood there for a minute, staring at the screen. For weeks, I had promised myself I wouldn't go back, wouldn't undo the progress I'd made, but curiosity got the better of me. I said okay. We met the next day at a small diner halfway between our houses. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked tired but softer somehow. She didn't start with apologies. Instead, she said, "I didn't realize how much we relied on you. It wasn't fair." I didn't know what to say. Hearing her admit that was something I'd stopped hoping for a long time ago. She told me things had been hard, but they were managing. Dad picked up consulting work again, and my brother had moved back home to help. "It's been humbling," she said. I asked if she hated me for doing it. She said she did, at first, but now she thought maybe it was what the family needed. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You spent years taking care of us, but maybe this was the first time you really took care of yourself." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about money, not about guilt, just about life, small things. She told me about Daisy, the dog, and how she still expects her fancy food deliveries. We even laughed a few times. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years that didn't end with someone asking for something. Before leaving, she reached across the table and said, "Don't disappear from us completely." I told her I wasn't disappearing. I was just learning how to exist on my own terms. When I drove home, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The resentment that used to sit like a weight on my chest was gone. What was left was something quieter: acceptance. That night, I looked through the old financial folders on my laptop one last time. Then I deleted them all. Every document, every receipt, every transaction that tied me to who I used to be. It didn't feel like erasing the past. It felt like clearing space for something new. Before going to bed, I opened my phone and saw one unread message, from my dad this time. It said simply, "Proud of you, kid." I smiled, set the phone down, and turned off the light. For the first time in my life, I didn't fall asleep thinking about what I owed anyone. The next few weeks felt different. Quiet in a way that didn't scare me anymore. I was starting to understand that peace doesn't feel exciting. It feels steady. It doesn't make your heart race. It lets it rest. I began finding small routines that made me feel human again. Early mornings with coffee and no notifications. Long walks before work. Grocery lists that only had my own needs on them. It was strange how foreign that used to feel. One morning, I got an email from my brother. The subject line was, "Update." I hesitated before opening it, half expecting another guilt trip. Instead, it was practical. He told me he'd gotten promoted at his new job and that he and his girlfriend were saving to move out. Then he wrote, "You were right. We leaned on you too much. I'm not mad anymore, just figuring out how to stand on my own now." I stared at that sentence for a while. It didn't fix everything, but it felt like the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. I replied simply, "I'm proud of you. Keep going." It was a short message, but I meant it. Later that week, I decided to visit my parents. Not for an apology, not out of obligation, just because I wanted to see them as people, not responsibilities. The house looked different. Smaller somehow. The flower beds were overgrown, and the porch light flickered, but there was something real about it. My dad opened the door, and for a second, it felt like stepping into a version of my childhood I'd forgotten. He smiled, pulled me into a hug, and said, "Your mom's baking something she claims you'll like." Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon. My mom was in the kitchen, wearing an old apron I hadn't seen in years. She looked up and said, "Don't just stand there. Set the table." It was so normal that I laughed. Dinner wasn't tense this time. There were pauses, yes, but comfortable ones. They told me about small things: their garden, my dad's new project, the neighbor who kept borrowing tools. No talk of money, no guilt. Halfway through the meal, my mom said she'd been thinking about getting a part-time job at the local library. I asked if she wanted to, and she smiled. I think it's time I did something for myself too. That moment hit me harder than anything else. For the first time, it felt like we were equals, 3 adults, all learning to take care of themselves. When I left that night, my mom walked me to the door. She didn't say much, just hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you, even if I don't say it right." The drive home was quiet. I rolled the windows down and let the cold air in. There was no heaviness in my chest this time, just a calm certainty that something had shifted for good. I realized that cutting them off hadn't been an ending, it was a reset. It forced all of us to grow up in ways we'd been avoiding. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the floor, watching the lights outside flicker through the blinds. My life was smaller now, but it was mine, and maybe that was the whole point. By the time fall came around, everything in my life had quietly rearranged itself. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden revelations, just small, consistent changes that made me realize how much lighter I'd become. My savings account stopped feeling like a source of guilt and started feeling like possibility. I began putting money toward things that were only mine: night classes, travel plans, a new camera I'd wanted for years. I wasn't trying to fill a void anymore. I was building something. Work felt different too. I used to take on every extra project, afraid of disappointing anyone. Now I did my job well, and then I stopped. I went home on time. I said no when I needed to, and nothing fell apart. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I got another text from my mom. Just a photo this time. Daisy, sitting in the living room with a crooked little birthday hat on. Underneath, she wrote, "We still miss your cooking." I smiled and texted back a simple heart. That was enough. The following weekend, I visited them again. The house looked different in ways that had nothing to do with money. New curtains, plants by the window, small handmade decorations. My mom looked happier. My dad seemed calmer. The energy was different. Over lunch, my mom mentioned that she'd started volunteering at the library twice a week. She said she liked being around people again. My dad joked that he was learning to actually manage money like an adult. My brother had moved out finally. It was strange sitting there, realizing that the disaster I'd caused had actually fixed more than it broke. After lunch, my mom showed me a box she'd been cleaning out. Old letters, photos, receipts, pieces of the past. At the bottom was a birthday card I'd written when I was 12. In shaky handwriting, it said, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." She smiled when she read it out loud and said softly, "You did. For a long time. But it's my turn now." I didn't cry, but I wanted to, because for years I'd been waiting for that one sentence, to feel seen not just as the helper, but as her daughter. That night, back at my apartment, I sat on the balcony watching the city lights. The air was cold enough to make my hands shake, but I didn't go inside. I thought about how strange it was that something as simple as money could twist love into obligation, and how sometimes the only way to fix it was to burn the old version of love down and start again. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what would happen next. My family would figure things out. So would I. We were all, finally, learning to survive without using each other as crutches. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. A new message from my brother. "Mom's talking about hosting Christmas again. She says this time, everyone pays for their own gifts." I laughed out loud. It wasn't a full circle moment. It wasn't redemption, but it was progress. And that, I realized, was enough. Christmas came faster than I expected. For years, the holidays had been an exhausting performance. Me quietly funding everything while everyone else pretended it was all effortless. This time, there were no secret credit card charges, no midnight transfers, no panic over making everything perfect. I showed up with one dish, a bottle of wine, and nothing to fix. When I walked into my parents' house, the air felt different. The decorations were smaller, simpler. The lights flickered unevenly, and the tree leaned slightly to one side, but it all looked honest. My mom greeted me with a long hug instead of the usual commentary about how late I was. My dad was in the kitchen trying to carve a turkey that looked like it had barely survived the oven. My brother teased him, my mom rolled her eyes, and for the first time in years I laughed with them. Really laughed. Not the polite kind I used to fake. Dinner was imperfect and wonderful. There was no expensive wine, no catered desserts, no new furniture to show off. Just us. Real, flawed, trying. At one point, my mom brought out an old photo album. I'd forgotten half the pictures. Birthdays, vacations, moments that looked happier than they probably were. She paused on one of me at 16, grinning with braces and holding a homemade cake. She said quietly, "You were always trying to make everyone happy." I told her I used to think that was the only way to keep love. She nodded. "I think I made you believe that." The room went quiet for a moment, but not uncomfortably so. My brother broke the silence by saying he was grateful I'd forced a family reset. He even smiled when he said it, which, coming from him, meant more than an apology ever could. Later, when everyone was cleaning up, my dad handed me a small box. I started to protest, thinking it was something expensive, but he said, "Just open it." Inside was a tiny brass keychain, engraved with my initials, nothing more. "It's for you," he said. "Not a house key, not a car, just a reminder that what's yours gets to stay yours." I didn't realize I was crying until my mom reached over and squeezed my hand. Driving home that night, the roads were nearly empty. The car I drove now was smaller, practical, a far cry from the luxury one that had started everything, but I loved it more. It was quiet, steady, mine. When I got home, I placed the keychain on my nightstand. It caught the light from the lamp and glimmered faintly. Simple, unremarkable, but heavy with meaning. I sat on my bed and thought about how far things had come. A few months ago, I was drowning in resentment and guilt, convinced I'd destroyed my family. Now, somehow, we were rebuilding something better, something honest. The strangest part was realizing I didn't need to be needed anymore. I could love them without carrying them, and they could love me without taking from me. I lay back, letting that thought settle. It felt final, but not like an ending. More like I'd finally stepped into the life that had been waiting for me all along. And for the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep feeling completely at peace.